Welcome to Beyond Pipeline. We talk about how top performers win the inner game of sales. My name is John Haboosh, and I'm your host. And today we have a guest that needs no introduction. He's a great mentor and example to the sales industry, Josh Braun. Josh, how are you?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on, John.
Yeah, I'm again, as I was telling you, I'm very excited to have you on, which is an understatement. And just yeah, you've done a ton for the sales industry and just for myself, so thank you. With that being said, there's a lot we have to cover from more of your more of your 10 selling rules and just how you're really human in prospecting. And but I do want to start actually with how you got into sales. I saw you were formerly a teacher and found your way into sales. I'd love to start there because I think it's a story a lot of people have not heard yet, and I was surprised to see it.
Yeah, I think like most people, I fell into sales accidentally. My first sales job was teaching 5-year-olds the love of reading and writing. So I was trying to sell them on books, which is a tough sell for antsy 5-year-olds. So it was my first experience of how you get people to get excited about what it is that you are presenting to them so that they hopefully will be motivated to learn a little bit more about a book in this case. And I wasn't even giving them the book. I had to arm them with the knowledge to sell their mom to take them to the bookstore to buy the book. So I would dress up like interesting little characters and I would act out the stories, but I would always leave these little cliffhangers and leave the kids wanting to know what was on the next page. And I really enjoyed that, because parents would come up to me and say, why does Johnny want the Twits? Like, what are these books? And the books would like sell out in the local stores. So it was my real first sales job. And that's how I got a little taste of sales. And then when I was working out in the gym one day and I overheard some guy talking about some .com homeschool thing. I didn't know what the internet was. I didn't know what .com was. He got to know me a little bit. I was 2 years into getting my doctorate. I was going to become an elementary school principal. And he's like, you should sell educational software. You'd be like a good salesperson. And I go, I don't know anything about selling. He goes, it's just like teaching, like you're doing now. And he took me under his wing, and that's where I sold my first SaaS software, a company called Child U, which was a homeschool product for kids.
What what made you want to be a teacher initially? Because I was so like it doesn't surprise me now that like I've now that I've like seen what you do, but like I was so shocked at first. Like you wanted to be a teacher? Oh, interesting. Like what made you want to do that?
My mom was a teacher, and it's a feeling that you get when you are able to see a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old's kids' eyes light up because they've learned something that you have helped them learn. And I didn't really realize the power of that until the kids that I was teaching were like 17, 18 years old. So they had gone from 5-year-olds to 17-year-olds. And I'm out to dinner frequently in Boca. And I often hear, Mr. Braun. And I didn't recognize these kids at all. You taught me when I was in first grade, you were in the media center when I would come in for my special classes. And you taught me like how to read and how to act and how to do photography and how to do video. And you really stuck with me. And now I'm doing like arts at this school. And I just want to thank you. And I would hear this over and over and over again. It's very fulfilling work. It's almost like a calling. So there was a lot of fuel there. And I probably would have stayed in it if not for that fateful day when I was at the gym and I struck up a conversation with a very charismatic CEO. His name is Scott Udine with Child U, and he sold me on taking a chance in the corporate world, and that's why I left teaching.
What what made you want to take the leap from teaching? It sounds like you're 2 years into your doctorate, I believe, and like because I feel like it's very analogous to people like making career changes or changes. Like, what made you really go, you know what, I think I'm gonna give this sales thing a shot versus being principal?
So whenever I'm faced with a decision like this, I like to certainly think about the pull of the new thing. Like that sounds pretty cool, but what I would be missing out on if I didn't make the choice, like would I regret it? So I got to thinking like I could always go back to teaching if I didn't like this, but this was something very new. The money was obviously way better. It was like triple what I was making at the time. Even as a
Wow.
principal, I wouldn't have been able to make what this guy was offering. He was offering something called stock options, which I had no idea what those things were. They ended up being, quite valuable for me. And so I thought, I could try this for like a year or two. And if I don't like it, it doesn't work out. I could go back to being pursuing my doctorate. I was about a year in to a 2-year program. So that's kind of where my head was with it. There wasn't like a lot of risk in making the switch. The other thing that you may or may not know about me is I'm pretty big on the belief that the universe has your back. It's just happened so many times in my life. There are no real wrong choices. Like you might think, well, did I choose right? What if I would have chose this other thing? But what I have found is it all works out okay in the end. Like the universe always has your back. And even if it doesn't quote unquote work out, you learned a lot about yourself and about what you don't like, and you can always go back to something else. So it takes the pressure off of making a decision. You just make one, and this has happened to me so many times. It just always, it just works out. I don't know. I don't call it God. I call it like the universe. There's
Hmm.
something out there that's just sort of like has your back in these situations.
How did you come up with that? I'll call it a belief system. How'd you come up with the belief system that the universe has your back? Maybe you just decided one day you're going to believe that. I really wish we were all that. But like, how'd you create that? Like, I'll call it psychological safety. It's probably overly logic, but how'd you do that for yourself to where you're like, all right, universe has got my back no matter what?
Because it happens so many times over and over again. Like you break up with, there was a girl I was dating. Like I was madly in love with this girl and she broke up with me. I'm like, I'm never recovering from this ever. This is like it. And then you meet someone else and they're like, wow, I can't imagine not being with this person. You sort of like find this other person. I've had the job situation that we just talked about with, should I leave being a principal? It's safe. I'm never going to get fired. I don't have to worry about quota to this other, .com, that thing that worked out. And then when I was working corporate, I'm like, maybe I should start my own company and maybe I should, teach sales training since I like to teach and I like sales training and I like, been pretty successful as a salesperson. And if it doesn't work out, I could always get another sales job. And that worked out. Like everything works out. And now it might not work out in the positive. You might discover, that wasn't really for me. Like for instance, 3 weeks ago, a good friend of mine asked me to go fly fishing with him. I'd never been fly fishing before. I've never fished before, but I'm like, that sounds like could be nice out in nature. So I got, I don't know, $2,000 or $3,000 worth of stuff, waders and boots and fly gear and all kinds of stuff he told me to get. And I went out on the river in Casper, Wyoming, and it was beautiful. And I saw these deer crossing and it was phenomenal. It was going really well. And then I'm casting, and all of a sudden I get like a hit on the line and I reel the fish in, and he's a catch and release kind of guy. And so I bring this fish into the net. And as I'm holding the fish, trying to release the hook from it, I'm like, this is awful. Like using fish for sport didn't feel good on my soul. Like I didn't like the way that felt. I think I would have been better if I like ate it, but this wasn't that kind of a trip. This was like fishing for sport. I felt like the fish was like entertaining me for pleasure and it didn't feel good. So I just came home and I said, I'm not doing that again. And I just sold all the fishing gear. Like it's all okay. Like we tend to like ruminate over what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And this has happened over and over and over again. Nothing really terrible happens. It all just works itself out. You learn a little bit about, oh, that wasn't for me. And you just keep going. And so to answer your question, it's because it's happened so many times in so many different situations where it became like everything, ingrained in me, I suppose.
Have you always been like that, where you have that I'll call like a quiet confidence that things will work out, or is that something you had to kind of work on as you were growing up and developing as an adult?
It's not so much that I even worked on it. It's almost like it happened organically. Like you're always faced with these choices in life, A or B, C or D, and you ultimately end up making them. And you think, man, what happens if that doesn't work out? And then you realize, oh, that is not anywhere as near as bad as I thought it was going to be. Like even this fly fish trip, like it's never as bad as your mind makes up the story that it's going to be, because your mind is really negatively biased, and it'll conjure up all these things that'll prevent you from doing, anything. I mean, even when I did triathlons, and I had a Coach Anna, and I would start these triathlons at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it would be petrified because there's 100 people starting the swim start at the beginning, and you're going to get kicked in the face. And I told her, I was like nervous, and I'll never forget what she said. She's like, "Yeah, just go. Everyone's nervous. Just go do it nervous." And like, and you go, and maybe you get kicked a little bit. It's not a big deal. Maybe your goggles fall off. You put them back on, but you realize as you start to do this thing that you're thinking is kind of the enemy. Like you have these thoughts that come in and then you fuel them or you observe them. And when you observe them and you say, I'm just going to do it nervous, it just turns the volume down very quickly. But it's very easy to get caught up in the thoughts if you're not able to observe them.
That was a great thing. I'm gonna take. I took a note for myself. I'm just gonna do it nervous. It's a great line. Um, let's let's go back to when you were now like starting this new sales job. You're trying to learn the ropes to sales. Like, can you go back in time and just share like what was that like for you to try to like wrangle? I'm sure you weren't Josh Braun we know today when he first started out. So like, yeah, can you walk us through that a little bit? What it was like to learn sales and
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I bought all the sales books and they all had one thing in common from my perspective in reading them. It was all about how do I get someone to do what I want them to do? And they all had different techniques on how to push and convince and persuade and overcome objections and what to say. And as I was trying that, it just felt awful on my soul. Like I was doing it, but it felt awful on my soul. And I wasn't getting much success. I mean, I had some success, but I wasn't getting much success. At the same time, I was going through some stuff with my father. I had lost him. And so I was going to see a psychologist at the time. And what I realized pretty quickly in seeing a psychologist was they weren't trying to talk me into anything or persuade me to do anything. What they were doing was asking me questions that allowed me to reflect on things and come to my own conclusions and draw me out and make me feel understood. And I go, this is really interesting, like this whole world. And I started delving deep into like Carl Jung and all these psychologists that are based on how you draw people out and this concept of motivational interviewing, how you ask questions that don't lead people, but allow them to think a little differently and come to their own conclusions as to why they might be motivated. And I thought, I wonder if I could apply that to selling. And this is, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, maybe somewhere in there. And I just started experimenting with different language, much based on the psychologist that I was seeing. I would kind of write stuff down and I would like this could be like how I might open a call. This could be like what I might say to help uncover their possible motivation rather than pushing my agenda. And it just started to feel much better on my soul. I had this detached, mindset of like, I'm not here to fix. I'm not here to persuade or convince. I'm here to ask questions that shine a light on a potential problem and have people draw their own conclusions as to if they're interested in potentially motivating themselves to change. And ironically, the less I cared about making the sale, and when I made this switch, the more people just opened up and the conversations just changed. I was just getting to more truth. Doesn't mean that every sale closed, but I certainly wasn't spending time chasing and pursuing deals that weren't closing. I was getting to more truth. I made more sales coincidentally, the less I actually cared about making the sale and the more I made that shift. So it was kind of two forces that came together there. It was my psychology experience with a therapist, um, and also this idea of reading these sales books, which were the complete opposite of that, which was very much based on, I know what you need, let me give it to you. It was very much based on explaining versus drawing people out.
yeah, and the point about like getting to truth, I think holds a lot of weight, at least for me, as just like getting to the truth of the matter versus trying to say, like trying to like almost like draw up curiosity to be like, I'll get on a call. It's like, no, just get to the truth. Like, is this even going to be helpful or not? Move forward. How did you train yourself as you were I'm gonna call it developing sales rep, but how did you train yourself to keep coming from that place, especially now I assume obviously this company you had a quota, you were learning. There's still some ignorance around sales, just trying to learn, how to walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, how did you get yourself to keep showing up in a way with energy that enable you to have that detachment, let's call it, or yeah.
Yeah. So what I realized, and again, this is from my experience with psychology and a little stoicism, like peppered in as well. It's about that time I was started to read up on stoicism. Is your intent going into a sales call affects your behavior. So if your intent when you go in to make a cold call or a discovery call, if your intent is, I got to close this person, like if that's like in the back of your mind, what ends up happening is you say things and behave in ways that feel pushy and you might not even know it. There's a famous neuroscience phrase that describes this: neurons that fire together wire together. Like, so if you have the
Mhm.
same intent, you have the same behavior, and then you have the same result, right? So this first idea is to really come up with a mantra that I created a while back, to ground myself and to remind myself that it's not my job to talk people into buying. My job is to let go of assumptions, to detach from the outcome, to certainly illuminate potential problems by asking neutral questions, and then have humble curiosity to determine one of two things. Either yes, the prospect wants to open up and share more and continue the conversation, or no, they don't at this time. And it's cool either way. I have this sort of abundance versus scarcity mindset, which I think a lot of salespeople don't have because they have this quota hanging over them.
Mhm.
Ironically, when you detach, it's an energy that the prospect actually feels, not as a way to get a sale, but as a genuine intent going in. And it's a way to lower their guards around salespeople, which tend to have a bad reputation. I mean, just a couple of days ago, I posted on LinkedIn a big no solicitation sign. I said, this is on a small business. It said, no soliciting, do not knock on the door, no salespeople allowed. And in the post I wrote, is this an objection? If so, what would you do? Thinking it was a joke, because I would thought that most salespeople would just say, oh, I'll just go to a door that doesn't have that sign on it. But that is not what salespeople said. I think it got about 400 comments, about 120,000 views, some crazy thing like that. Over 80% of salespeople said that they would ignore the sign and walk in anyway and knock on the door. And yet, if I asked them, if you had a no trespassing sign on your door, would you want people to knock on your door? And they're like, well, no, not exactly. So this idea that salespeople do this because they feel that they have to sell everyone. There are so many people that don't have a no solicitation sign on the door. Like most businesses don't, most people that you call don't. So it's this idea of having abundance versus scarcity and not thinking that you have to sell everyone. When you think it's your job to sell everyone to make quota, this is why it sets in motion all this type of behavior. When you lean back and someone picks up the phone and says, I can't talk right now, I'm in a meeting. If you're attached to the outcome, that's exactly why I called. Most people I call that are in a meeting. The reason I'm calling is, let me ask you one question, right? That's a very attached mindset. If you're detached and someone says, I can't talk right now, I'm in a meeting, even if they're lying, they don't want to talk, you could just lean back and you could say in a relaxed voice, that's okay, I'll call you later. And then you could just get off the phone and call them later or send them an email or send them something in the mail or call someone else that doesn't say they're in a meeting, which is most people. Right? And so this idea of detachment has a lot of tentacles. When you're attached, it's you behave in certain ways. So I meditate and I say my mantra whenever I'm interacting with a client. And as you do this, like anything, like working out in the gym, your muscle gets stronger as you meditate daily and you repeat your mantra and you start to see like, oh, this is better. It starts to burn the muscle in. You sort of rewire your brain in that way.
What is your mantra?
So my mantra is this: um, it's not my job to talk people into buying. My job is to illuminate a potential problem and listen with humble curiosity. Some people will want to continue the conversation, some won't. It's okay either way. Because that's really all you can do, right? You don't control how people respond to your message or if they want to go forward. Just like if you were interviewing for a job, it's not like you're complacent if you detach. If you're interviewing for a job, you're not complacent if you're detached. You do your research on the company, you figure out what kind of questions you want to ask, you maybe read up on their clients. At the end of the interview, you might say, hey, John, I know 45 minutes isn't a lot of time to know someone, but do you have any reservations about putting me through to the next round? Like you do all that stuff, but you don't control if they actually put you through to the next round. And so when you focus on things that are not in your control, it's kind of madness. And when you only focus on things that are in your control, it's very empowering because you know you did the best you could, and that's all you could really do. So when I made that shift, it was very profound and freeing. And there was no more like debilitating feeling of rejection because I'm like, I don't control the response to my message.
What can so it sounds like meditation helped, the mantra helped. What can people, either an SDR, an AE, do again, who's in an environment where they're not in an environment where there's an abundance mindset? They might struggle, they might in and out of an abundance mindset. I know I definitely have in my own life. Like what else could they do to build that muscle that you're talking about? Maybe it's just doing those things over and over again. And that's fine. But I'm curious, what advice would you give people that are in that position?
Yeah. So if you want to learn how to play the piano or anything, um, it's kind of boring actually, because I'm learning the piano now. I mean, you got to play scales for 15 minutes a day. Then you got to work on your piece. And then there's some exercises you have to do to work on your finger dexterity. Like it's pretty boring. You get to play a piece and maybe make some progress on it. It's the same thing if you want to grow your wealth, like investing in the stock market, which I've been doing since I was 20. I'm 53 now. It's pretty boring. Like it's boring. Meditation is the skill, like playing scales on the piano. I mean, you don't have to do it a lot. 10 minutes a day. And the superpower that it gives you, and this is not just for sales, this is like for life as well, is that if you don't do meditation, what ends up happening is you have a thought, which you can't control. Everyone has thoughts, all the time. If there was like a megaphone in your brain, people would think you're absolutely crazy because these thoughts are just coming in all the time. And most people that don't meditate have a thought and are now lost in their thought. Uh, my boss wants to meet with me. I'm going to go on a PIP. She definitely is not going to like my performance. I'm probably going to go on a PIP. I'm probably going to get fired. And this can go on if your meeting's next week for 7 days. You could be kind of lost in this thought. That's most people. They're on autopilot if they don't meditate. It's not a great way to go through sales and certainly not life because you're suffering and you're anxious all the time. With meditation, you have to do it a while. But what it unlocks, what the superpower is with it, is it allows you to observe your thoughts. And you realize that, oh, there's an observer and then there's my thought. They're separate things. I am not my thought. And so when you're talking to a prospect, instead of thinking about what you want to say, which is if you don't do meditation, your mind is racing, you can simply listen to what the prospect is saying fully and process it and then respond to it in a very thoughtful way because you've practiced meditation, because you're aware that you want to speak and you're choosing not to speak. Versus if you didn't have meditation, you want to speak and you cut the prospect off. I mean, I hear it all the time when I listen to cold calls and discovery calls. I mean, you are good at this instinctually. I can't tell you the number of podcasts I've been on where I'm talking and the other person will just interrupt and won't wait for 2 beats after the prospect is done talking. But you have to be self-aware. And that's where the repetitions of the meditation comes in. There's not like a shortcut or a hack to it that I've discovered. Maybe psychedelics can help as well. We can get into that if you want to dabble in that. But that's not for everyone. That's a whole separate conversation. But that's also helped sort of rewire some of the neurons as well.
I shared the meditation with you. I've been doing it for a while, for multiple reasons. What does it feel like? Because I can describe it and what I think it feels like, but I think coming from you, it'll be like, what does it feel like to be observing a thought for folks that maybe don't know what that feels like? Like, if you could describe it, like, what does that feel like for you?
It feels like you're on a balcony and you're watching the movie happening in your head from the balcony. So let's say, for instance, a prospect is talking about something and you want to correct them because you know the answer to something. If you don't have the balcony skill, you're going to correct them and you're going to start talking and you're going to start explaining. And I have found when I sell, the second I go into explaining mode without making people feel heard and understood first, I'm losing. You could just feel the energy shift on the call. So with meditation practice, the prospect is talking and you're watching them from a balcony and you're watching your brain and your thoughts from a balcony, and your thought is saying, oh, I want to interrupt and I want to correct because that's not right what they're saying. And in that moment of observation, you create what's called a gap. And in that gap, you can simply choose to not interrupt them. But if you don't have that skill, you're on autopilot. You're interrupting. I mean, I was talking to a good friend of mine who's been meditating for a couple years now. And he used to do this thing when his kid would get in his car. He had a kid who was like 6 years old. He'd come in with his bag of Doritos. And he had a nice car. He didn't want his kid eating Doritos in the car. He would yell at his kid, like, don't put those Doritos in the car, put them at home. And it would ruin the whole day. Like they were both in bad moods the whole time. So he's meditating. And now he has the thought, my kid's eating Doritos in the car. Nothing's probably going to happen. There's 6 Doritos in the bag. If he gets a little smudge on the car, I could always clean it, if that even happens. And in that moment, he creates the gap and decides to say nothing. And the kid eats the 6 Doritos, nothing happens, and they have a wonderful day. Right. So that's the power of it, is the power of the pause, the power of observing and creating that gap. So you can, now you might choose to react the same way. You may choose to say, please don't eat the Doritos in the car, but at least now you have a choice. Versus before, there's no choice. So it's a very freeing, calming feeling. And it has big tentacles into sales. You know, someone says, you know, Josh, I'm looking at you and John Burroughs and Beck Holland, and what is it about you? Like, why should we choose you? And if you don't have the meditation, well, let me tell you why I'm different. If you have the meditation, you can simply drop back and you can say in a calm voice, John, if you don't mind me asking, what's motivating you to talk to me after talking to those guys? They're pretty good sales trainers. Not as a mechanism to get a sale, but just from a place of understanding where what's going on to see if I might be a potential fit or not. So again, this rewires your brain to not be so reactionary and hypey, which is what a traditional salesperson is. And so the prospects aren't used to that. You come across very different. It's a very different energy that you're emitting when you're talking to people.
What what does it feel like when, and actually more just curious, it's more of a sidebar, and we'll bring it back. When you like when you how does it feel like when you meditate, like for your brain? Like do you feel like when I close my eyes and do it for like do you feel like almost like an expansion when you close your eyes and kind of do it? Do you feel that too when you meditate? Like how does it feel like for you, so people kind of know?
Yeah. So there's the common misconception of meditating is I have to clear out all my thoughts. And I can't do that, so I can't meditate. That's the opposite of what meditation is. So meditation is allowing your thoughts to come and observing them. And sometimes if you have a mantra-based meditation, you can use a mantra, you can say a word, or you can focus on your breath to bring yourself back to the present. So it's this idea of lost in thought to back in present, which is the equivalent of doing a bench press, 1 rep. So I was swimming in the pool this morning, trying to practice mindfulness, meaning, can I observe my thoughts rather than being lost in them? And I think I was swimming for 6 minutes, lost in my thoughts. And then all of a sudden I became aware, like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about something I want to write. And then I came back to just observing the water, how it felt on my hands, the sounds I was hearing, the reflection of the water. And that went on for like, I think a couple minutes. And then I was lost in thought again. And then I came back. It's this back and forth process that is the work. It's the equivalent of doing the reps. So for me, I've experienced very small amounts. I'm not an expert at this by maybe like I'll have like 30 seconds or 40 seconds when you're like in the flow state where you feel like you're so present. Like the feeling that you would get if you were doing something that you were like love, like playing the piano or something that you were really engrossed in. You're like, you're not thinking about, are you going to get out of PIP? Are you going to make quota? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to get the interview? Like all those things, all those future events or past events, which is where we spend 98% of our time thinking about the terrible things that might happen or the things that have happened. You get in these, for me, very small moments of like, you're like in it. Like playing the piano is the closest thing that I can say that maybe if you've never meditated, playing an instrument, you're like in the zone, like in the flow state. You're like in the present, like in the moment right now. Another great book that I read many years ago that I read still twice a year that I actually listen to on audio, which is better than reading the book, is I can't recommend it enough, is Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. It
Yeah.
is just a phenomenal book to listen to, twice a year to sort of stay grounded. And he's got some exercises in there as well that are basically observing the everyday. Like if you go on a walk, instead of getting lost in thought, you can just smell. And you'll notice when you walk, there's different parts of your walk that smell different if you're tuned into it, if your antenna's up. You can listen, feel what your feet feel like on the ground, see what you're seeing, listen to what you're listening to. Like a bird has a loud sound and all of a sudden it gets further away, even a car, the same way. And this all is meant to bring you into the present. These are exercises that you can do. If you're in an airport, you could play a game of I would never wear that shirt. See people wearing shirts like again, these are exercises that get you like your attention focused. And if you don't realize this is a skill that can be learned and mastered, you don't pay any attention to it. And then you're like lost in the future or lost in the past.
How is
What does
learning?
it feel like for you? What does it feel like for you when you meditate? Actually, maybe after or during.
I think during what I found that's different, I was talking to my brother about this. Well, I was found it's different that um over especially over the last probably year is I've been doing it for a long time. And I went for a stretch and that I did it for a couple of years, like an hour a day, essentially, maybe 45 minutes. But I actually can feel as I close my eyes, I can feel a gap, right? It's coming right through here, and there's just space. That's all I can describe. It's just like endless space coming out the bottom. And I can even feel it tingle down. And it's almost like the brain just I need to
Uh,
study more of like the neurochemistry of the brain because I'm just like so curious as to what that is. So I feel different parts activating and shutting off almost. It's really, really weird. But it's wild.
how have you noticed it translating in over when you're not meditating, or if at all? Like, what have you noticed about it?
I was just about to ask you the same question, but I'll share with you first. I can I can sit and like there's some stuff going on with my family, my personal life right now, and I can sit and just like watch it and go like, okay, like that's not actually a problem. And I can see how it'll work itself out and then just like be there for a second and then be like, okay, like I'm not gonna give energy towards that. It's still there. We're still gonna, we're still gonna deal with it on Tuesday, but like it's not really there because I know it's not a problem. In all actuality. So that is how it helps me. 'Cause especially I found I'm just like so, like I'm sure you could, like I'm just I like yeah, I can in the past I've been like very just like I have a lot of energy. I can be really aggressive and just kind of and I just like help me to kind of take a step back. So that is how it helps me to see things clearly. I can see what's going on. I can see someone being more nervous. I can feel them, because I'm just kind of here. I'm not perfect at it, trust me. Ask my manager and my teammates, but I do my darndest. I really do. I really do.
Yeah, no, it's been my experience as well. I think Eckhart Tolle talks about this. It's like it's great. I wrote it down. It's like right now, this second, like this right now, is there any like problem? Is there any like big problem right now, this second? Like right, like not like this second. And the answer to that question, whenever I ask it, is no, not right now.
Yeah. No.
And then you start to really think about it. That's kind of all there is. Doesn't mean like you don't plan and you don't think about things, but like it does sort of ground you because you can get lost in that cycle of like, what if? So this sort of centers you. Yeah, that's been my experience as well. I was at a couple months ago. I was at the dog park, and I like you. I was a little, 50, when I was younger in my 20s. I was a little
Totally,
confrontational.
dude. Totally
Yeah, yeah,
wild. Yeah. Just like we
wild.
can talk about this for, I mean, just fucking, yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
continue. But
yeah. I mean, I was at the dog park, and this lady goes, "Where'd you get your dog?" And I go, "I got it from a breeder." And this lady teed off on me. You're such a jerk for doing that. You should adopt a dog. Breeders are puppy mills now. And when I was like 23, I would have barked back at this lady, right? But in this moment, I got the gap. Fortunately, now this doesn't happen all the time, but I'm like, okay, she's talking, and I'm thinking that I want to lash back, but I am observing that, and now I'm making a different choice. And the choice I want to make is humble curiosity, right? So she gets done talking, and I simply said, um, you know, you're right. If more people adopted, there'd be far fewer dogs that would be euthanized. And she was like, yeah, 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 yeah. And then I said something like, you're so passionate about rescuing animals. Like you just have this, and you could tell and this wasn't like as a way to like BS. It was like what I was feeling in the moment. And she just opened up. And after she got done sharing, she goes, well, tell me, why did you, end up, getting this dog from the breeder? And I go, well, let me get your take on this. Like, what do you do in those situations where you're looking for a specific, like, hypoallergenic dog with certain attributes? Are there any breeders that are like reputable? Are they all like terrible? And she goes, well, there are, some reputable breeders. And we just had a lovely, conversation. It wasn't that we agreed, but it didn't like escalate as it normally would, when you shift into this gear. And then we had a little conference, a little discussion, and it was over in about 4 or 5 minutes. So and that's all walks of your life. Same thing with sales. You run into these situations all the time where a prospect says, I have a vendor for that, or I'm using this. And the salesperson thinks, well, I better talk them out of it. And it's just the opposite. If you have this gear, someone says, I'm using a MP3 player. Oh, what do you got? What are you using? Like a Diamond Rio or like a Creative Nomad? Yeah, I'm using a Diamond Rio. Those guys, that Diamond brand, they kind of paved the way for all MP3 players. The interface is like so easy to use with that click wheel. What's been your experience using it? Talk, 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 talk. And then after they've vented a little bit, you might say, so I know, and that that MP3 player, when it came out, had the most amount of memory, 32 megs, which means it holds about 30 minutes of music. I know that you're a long distance runner. When you go on long distance runs, how are you dealing with that? Are you listening to the same songs on repeat, or do you change them out when you get bored? Well, yeah, I guess I just listen to them over and over and over again. Oh, you've probably looked into the iPod. Yeah, I looked into it. Oh, the price was too high? Well, it wasn't the price. I'm on a Windows machine. So now you've created a gap. They think that an iPod only works on a Windows machine. It doesn't only works on a Mac. And then you maybe created like an opening. But I'm not filling anyone's head with information. I'm doing what the therapist does to me, which is I'm listening, I'm reflecting, I'm asking a question, and I'm assuming that they've heard of the iPod before. Because chances are, no matter what you're selling, the person's heard of the category. If someone's calculating commissions for 100 reps on spreadsheets, they know it can be automated and they've chosen not to automate it. So I want to find out why rather than giving them a value prop. So, John, sounds like you're calculating commissions on spreadsheets. You must be some kind of a spreadsheet wizard. You got like 120 reps there. You've probably looked into automating it. Yeah, we looked into it like a couple of years ago. Oh, yeah, your rules are probably too complex for automation. Well, no, it's not that. It's X, Y, and Z. And now maybe you've created an opening or not. So it's very much a therapist's, approach through questioning and listening and reflecting versus explaining and telling and convincing and begging.
Keeping in mind, like having this attitude of detachment and abundance, what has it been like for you to maintain that type of attitude and disposition, especially as you've grown to candidly, I mean, other people, you're at the top of our industry. Like you've really grown immensely as far as just like um, people who know you and, accolades, stuff like that. Like, what has it been like for you to maintain this type of like detachment and just, yeah, styled ethos as you've grown like that? Because I think it could get to a lot of people's heads if that did occur. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, I don't really have any goals and I don't think about maintaining everything. I just wake up and I do the things that I do. Like I'll write every day. I'll do these podcasts. I'll do some sales, kickoffs, once in a while that I want to do. And I don't think about it like that. I just do the things that I like to do and I let everything else happen the way it happens. I don't think like, how do I maintain it? I mean, I get stopped sometimes if I'm out. Like I was in Colorado with my wife a couple months ago. We were in this remote hike and someone said, hey, Josh, are you from LinkedIn? This happened at like the Grand Canyon too. And I'll chat with people, but I don't like think about like, has it gone to my head or anything? I don't really view it like that. I just will just continue to do what I do. It's not like I'm like Taylor Swift or anything.
No, well, yeah, you are someone that, I think a lot of people look up to and appreciate. It sounds like you just kind of done what you like, what you enjoy, and things just kind of worked out and they just grew from there. It wasn't like you were trying to like go viral or whatever on
That's
it.
right. Yeah, you do what you enjoy and you hope that, and you pick something that intersects your expertise with something you like that actually can make money. So I enjoy playing the guitar, but I'm not going to make a living playing the guitar. But yeah, I think that's one of the mistakes a lot of salespeople make is they'll take a job because maybe the pay is good or they're promising the moon and the stars with options, and then all of a sudden they're selling IT tech to like IT people, and they don't even exactly care about it. They don't know about it. They don't know what it is. Versus someone that might be selling something in healthcare because they're a healthcare person, or they're a finance person, or maybe they're a salesperson. They're selling sales tech because they use it. It does matter. Like you have to sort of be passionate a little bit about what it is that you're selling. And I certainly am. You know, I like to teach specifically about sales in ways that don't feel pushy or persuady or salesy. This idea of like not begging and pushing for the sale. I like doing it, and so I just do it, whether it's on my podcast or this or through my posts. I'm also have my antenna up all the time. You know, so if I'm out to dinner or I'm with my wife and I see something that I think might relate to some sales thing that I want to teach, I'll write it down in my notes and then I'll relate it to the story, like that guy at the dog park, that lady. And there was another guy that stepped in dog poop and he was upset. He was yelling, trying to find the person's dog it was. And like, here's a guy who doesn't know the nature of a dog park. Nature of a dog park is there's poop in the grass. And if you don't accept that, you're going to be angry all the time. Just like if you don't accept in sales, getting ghosted or losing a sale. That's the nature of sales. You could do everything right and still lose a sale. I'm like, that's an interesting parallel. So I'll just write that down, you know, in my notes. So then I'll turn these observations, either things that I see or read or listen to, and I'll just connect them to like some kind of sales story. And that's constantly going on in my head. I try to turn that down a little bit sometimes because my wife's like, "Do we really have to write a post about a fork being small?" I'm like, "You know what? You're right. We could just eat the shrimp."
I also will, if anyone listening is interested, your book that has these little stories in it is so good. Like the one with, I forget her name, but she served you the banana cake because I don't like
Yes,
bananas with the cake.
Jennifer.
Oh,
Jennifer.
that's right, Jennifer, Grandma's Toaster. I highly recommend you guys check that out. That was, if we had more time, I'd dive in. We only got about 15 minutes, and I want to make sure we touch on some other stuff. But yeah, let me just tell you, I personally really appreciate it. So keep doing that, please.
Thanks.
Um, with that being said, you mentioned a topic that I wasn't expecting to cover, but I'm actually really curious, especially coming from you. What has your journey been like with psychedelics? You mentioned psychedelics earlier as part of maybe these ways you learn more about yourself and just about maybe your human experience. What got you to want to do psychedelics, and what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so I want to preface this by saying this is not for everyone. There are some caveats to this. So this isn't something that I'm recommending everyone go out and do. I want to say about 5 years ago, I was struggling with something with my dad because I had lost my dad at 52 to cancer,
Mhm.
and I was turning 52, and I was having a real hard time with it, thinking that I was going to get cancer. And I was seeing a therapist, I was taking meds, and a friend of mine who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, is a business mentor of mine, said, "Have you considered doing psychedelics?" Now, I've never smoked, I never drink, I never done any of this stuff. I was very opposed to it. And he introduced me to a book by Michael Pollan. And over the course of several years, I started reading about psychedelics from a therapeutic perspective, not as a party drug. And the more I got educated on it, the more I realized that I had a lot of misconceptions about it because of the counterculture. I thought people were going to jump out of windows, you're going to lose your mind. But I started educating myself on it over the process of like 2 years, just learning about it and listening to his experiences. And then I finally booked a journey with a woman in California and also in Fort Lauderdale. I'm sorry, Miami, where it's a what's called a hero's dose of psychedelics. It's 5 to 6 grams in a therapeutic setting. You're lying on a bed or like a comfortable couch with a blindfold on and music. And after about 40 minutes, when the psilocybin kicks in, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, what ends up happening, and this is very, very difficult to describe because words don't really serve it. But what happens is your ego turns to dust, meaning how you see the world. Everyone sees the world through their eyes and their lens.
Mhm.
And when that goes away, things that were in the background, meaning other people, other objects, other things, come to the foreground. And you have this sense of enlightenment that you've never really had before because you can't see these things otherwise. Like, for instance, I felt what it was like for my wife when I was in the hospital after doing a triathlon. because I overexerted myself. And I just thought when I was in the bed, you'll get over it. This is what happens when you do a triathlon. Very much my ego. But when you're in this psychedelic experience, you feel what it's like to be her, like you're in her heart, and you see this blackness, and it hits you in a very, visceral way, and it changes your perspective on how you view nature and how you view other people. It is by far the most profound experience I've ever had in my entire life. But again, it's not for everyone, but it's something that if you think, you're on some anxiety medication or you're struggling with certain things in your life, read up on it. It's underground. Obviously, it's illegal here in this country, but there's ways and guides that can help you, on this. It's been profound. I've only done twice. It's not one of those things you want to do like all the time. It's not addictive at all, but it is profound. It's just profound. And what I know for sure, this might sound a little woo-woo, there was an intelligence in there that was not of me, that was teaching me things. That basically said, that's all there is. You can hang up the phone now. You don't have to come back here. And it comes to you in these interesting moments, like when I was fly fishing. I don't think I would have had this experience when I held the fish if not for these psychedelics. Like it changed how I look at living things. Like I felt very differently when I was looking at this thing in the net. Like part of the mushroom was coming back to me of like this idea of we're all connected, type of thing. But it's just, it's pretty profound.
How, what do I want to ask? I agree with you. We are all connected. I share that with you. What, how do you decipher what with the, you mentioned the intelligence. I've actually felt that in deep states of meditation too. Sometimes I ask myself, what, how do I know if it's just like that voice in my head, like, or if it's actually like intelligence talking to me, or if it's just like my ego telling me what I want to hear or whatever? How do you decipher that for yourselves? I do believe that people have that themselves.
It's a feeling. Go do. I mean, the only way I could say it is I um, was an atheist going in. Um, I don't believe in God, but I believe there is something else. I call it the universe.
Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, so there is something else there that's a presence. That the only way that I know how to get at, because I'm not a monk, is through these medicines. And I felt it to this day. And the best description of this that I've ever heard is if you Google Sam Harris
Hmm.
mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms, Sam Harris, he does a 20-minute. Sam Harris is a philosopher, kind of a guy. He wrote some great books called Waking Up. He has an app, but he has a great 20-minute podcast. He's much better at words than I am of him describing it. It's the best description of what this is that I've ever heard before. But yeah, there is, and he describes the same thing. There's something, and people that do DMT, MMEO5, this same kind of description of this. There's this consciousness thing. There's this intelligence
Hmm.
there, and for me, it was definitely teaching me lessons that weren't apparent first. There were things that were unlocking, and I was like, oh, I kind of get this now. And then it would go, not really, and the music would change, and it would go deeper, and I'm like, oh, now I get it. And it goes, no, not really, because with the therapist, there's a distance. The time is up. With this thing, there's no distance. It like knows the deal, and it's a phenomenal, teacher for like it gives you such empathy for nature and living things and other people in your life.
Do you believe in destiny?
How do you define destiny?
Destiny being defined as it's a predetermined fate that no matter what yeah, no matter our decisions are predetermined, and that's the outcome of our life is predetermined. We're meant to do a certain thing and actually become that thing.
Yeah, so this is the free will, no free will philosophical debate. So I don't believe in free will. So for people that might not know what we're talking about, you can Google up on this. This is not like facts. These are perspectives by philosophical people. Go back and forth. There's people on both sides. But like if you go to the grocery store and you pick up Coke instead of Pepsi, you might think that's a choice. But you've been advertised Coke for a long time in your life. Maybe your mom bought Coke. Maybe you've seen it on billboards forever. Maybe you've been exposed to it when you're 4 years old. And so that choice of you picking Coke, is that really your choice? Or was it based on events and circumstances that happened in your life? And I think everything's like that. I mean, I think, people that have problems with like drugs or alcohol or they're criminals were born with different genetics and born into different situations, and they really didn't have a choice in how things unfolded for them versus us, maybe who had, different backgrounds. So for me, it allows me to be more empathetic when I see people in these, different situations. But again, these are not absolutes. This is just a belief I have. Sam Harris, I know, is a no free will person, but there's also very smart philosophical debates on why people think there is free will. But I'm a no free will kind of a guy. What about you? Are you on the fence there? Do you think where are you on it?
Oh man, Josh. I go back. I like to think that I'm in some control of at least my inputs. I know the outputs I'm not, and it is what it is. I like to think that I'm in some control. Um, yeah, I'm just similar to you. I mean, there have been really challenging periods in my life where I've made some tough decisions, or I feel like I made the decision, and my life's turned out for the better, and it took a lot of strength to endure. And I like to think that that is um, of free will, and I could have made other options, and so that's where I'm at. But I could see where it's not free. I do believe in conditioning, though, where you mentioned people will grow up in different environments and thus are more predisposed. I think there are certain avenues that people are like a highway where they're much more likely to go that way. Or as of right now, I still believe that you can make a different decision. It's much harder though for certain people than others based off predisposition, environment, things like that. I just don't know if it's like, because then it means like you were always meant to be, Josh, and like where you are, and like that means then like you didn't really have to. It's just like it would have happened regardless. I don't know if I have a. I don't know if I believe that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's the idea here is that the choices that you think you're making by nature of you making those choices are in your life by something that happened in the past. Right. So the fact that you're deciding, should I have chicken parmesan or linguine and clams, you might think that's a choice. But the fact that you're in an Italian restaurant thinking just those two things is based on previous things that have happened in your life. It feels like it's a choice. It definitely feels like a choice. But the choice between linguine and clams is already made. And the fact that you're going to have the chicken parmesan tonight is already done in your brain. Like it may feel like a choice, but I think as you get deeper into this, you're like, everything's kind of like that. Everything's kind of like that. So I don't know. Again, it's philosophical
It's
debate.
interesting though. It's
Yeah, it
interesting. I
is.
didn't
It
think this
is.
conversation would go that way. It's so cool. It's fun to talk about. I was not planning on this, man. Um, God, that's wild. That's an interesting thing to think about. So then
Yeah.
that means that you believe that like you're meant to like the person you're married to, you're always meant to go marry them, and like what you're doing, you're always meant to go do, and like what you choose to do after this, you're always meant to go and choose that.
It's not that you can't learn from it and it doesn't inform you. And it's not that you're meant for it. It's that there's not really a free will to it. Like, for instance, my wife, Jenna, I met her in the gym. My dad was a member of that gym. So I went to that gym. Was that my free will, or did I go because my dad was a member of that gym and he went because his dad was a member of that gym or his friend was a member of that gym? And so when I met Jenna, was that truly free will?
Hmm.
Not really. Not really. I could have worked out at Gold's, but I didn't because my dad's like, oh, you'll work out here because we have a family membership. So, it's,
Interesting, dude. This is
yeah,
yeah. Oh man, yeah. This is cool conversation to pick up at a different time. This is because we could take us near hour, and I don't want to
right,
misuse your time.
right.
Um, Josh, this has been amazing. I really really appreciate it. Before I ask the final question, where can people find you and learn more about you?
So if you go to my website, you'll see my book under the shop section that you were talking about. That's a good way to see my favorite essays that I've written all compiled in one place. And I'm always adding to that. It's under the shop section. It's a book called For Sale. It's free. And then on LinkedIn, I post there pretty frequently as well. And then on your podcast, tune into your podcast. You'll hear me and other people that you might like to listen to.
Thank you, Josh.
But you
And I
guys don't
have
have a choice. You don't have a choice whether or not you're going to my website or not. You're either going to go or not go, and it's not even a choice. That's the crazy thing.
Oh man, that's gonna make me think. That's gonna make me think today. All right, let's end on this. Um, if someone could not listen, if someone was not able to listen to the predetermined choices to this podcast, but they can only listen to this last part that you're about to say, and like, they're a SDR or AE, working to just sell in a more high integrity way, and just also just looking to find their way in life. What what advice, what's the one piece of advice that you would give them?
So I'm going to mention it again only because it's so profound. And that is once a year, listen, don't read. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Listen to that 10, 15 minutes a day. It's a 7 hour book ish. Listen to that and then practice getting the reps in with daily meditation, mindfulness practice. That's not only going to make you a better salesperson, I think it'll make you a better person too.
Josh, thank you. Wow, damn. So, dude, thank you so much. Everyone for listening, or everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. If you feel compelled, share this to someone that might need or benefit. Just a big thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.